I think since most of everything was donated and given out for free, I don't think people are too probably worried about the audit coverage of that. But if it's necessary, that's what we would do. So then right before Helene, we were trying to fill one open position. We actually had a bunch of interviews scheduled for the week after Helene hit, which was a bummer. We had to cancel all those interviews. The county is now under a hard hiring freeze. And so between that, we were not able to fill the position. And also our one auditor, Lisa White, has said that she wants to retire at the end of January to spend more time with her family. Helene kind of made her reprioritize a lot of things, which full support for her. I'm incredibly happy for her, but it's definitely a bummer for us in internal audit. Lisa was a fantastic employee. She had worked for the county for many years before in health and human services. And so she knew the county really well. And she was very sharp. She was a CPA. She had a lot of credentials and she was very, very good auditor. But glad that she gets to spend more time with her family. I'm happy for her, even if it's bad for me. And then obviously there was a massive reevaluation of risk by Buncombe County's management, as you can imagine, during this whole process, which means some of what we had kind of discussed during our risk assessment interviews is maybe not as relevant anymore. So Helene was kind of a massive upheaval for the internal audit function. I never, like I said, as an internal auditor, normally someone asks me to do something that's not audit related, I say I can't do that because of independence reasons. In this case, I feel like I didn't have much of a choice. I feel like I was kind of being called to jump in and help out our community and jump right in and help out. So that's what Helene looked like. So next steps for the rest of this fiscal year. Once the hiring freeze ends, and I'm not sure when that's going to happen. I'm not sure if Avril's here. I don't know if she wants to comment. I don't even know if Avril knows when the hiring freeze is going to end at this point. But once it does, once the hiring freeze does, we're going to try and fill both of those positions.
Yeah. What exactly positions are they? Are they staff positions?
It's 2 staff auditor positions.
Staff auditors.
Yes. And my goal was to try and, once the hiring freeze ends, I kind of wanted to lean towards hiring one regular auditor and then one IT auditor. Just because IT is something that I like to say I know enough to be dangerous, but IT is always a huge risk area, and having someone that has that expertise is, I think, valuable for our audit shop. But that obviously none of that happens until the hiring freeze ends. And then obviously, you know, one of the things that's important is developing process documentation. And so that means things like, you know, our audit manual, need to draft one of those and have a really solid audit manual in place. Also, you know, templates and things like that for our software, just kind of generally kind of building the framework on which we're going to prop up this audit shop. Because right now there's not a whole lot of framework kind of there. So I'm working on building that framework as I'm kind of going through the process of doing the actual audit. And then obviously the rest of this fiscal year, I'll be beginning on the audit work that's hopefully gets approved at this meeting. Next steps for fiscal year, I'm going to kind of look through our software needs and see if it makes sense to switch to a different software. We're using a software called Diligent right now. It's a very good software. It's very expensive. And it has kind of a lot of bells and whistles that we don't really need in internal audit. And so it's one of those things where if we can save some money for the county and maybe shift to a different software that does exactly what we need, it's kind of a win-win where we can save some money and still be just as effective. But I don't know if that will end up happening. It kind of depends on what other companies have on offer. I was planning on working on that this fiscal year. Helene kind of threw a wrench in that. So it'll probably be for next fiscal year that I'll do that evaluation. Additionally, one of the things I hope to do is develop a departmental strategic plan, and then hopefully we get some auditors hired and I can work on training those auditors in the next fiscal year. Getting an auditor from, you know, hired to fully trained is definitely a bit of a process, and so it'll take some time to kind of get everyone up and running. So that's kind of where we're at going forward for the rest of this fiscal year and the next fiscal year. And then I kind of wanted to chat a little bit about what standards we should be using. If you haven't been looking at the PowerPoint, I would definitely kind of glance at this one for this slide. There's a lot of text on here. But basically, there's kind of 2 big standards that we can consider following. There's the Global Internal Audit Standards, which are sort of informally known as the Red Book, and then the Generally Accepted Governmental Auditing Standards, which are sort of known as the Yellow Book. And so the difference between those 2 is that the Red Book is typically meant for internal audit shops. So it was drafted by the Institute of Internal Auditors and was built to be used for internal audit. The Yellow Book standards was generally meant for performing external audit services for the government or for the legislative auditor at the Government Accountability Office. And so it's really meant more for external audit functions rather than internal audit functions. Additionally, one of the things that came up when I was going through the interview process when I spoke with Admiral was about consulting services and if it would be valuable for internal audit to offer those services to management to be able to kind of add value in a way that doesn't compromise our independence. And Admiral said that consulting services are something that she would be interested in internal audit being able to offer. The IIA has specific standards set about consulting services, and they show that it adds value to management if you're able to do them well. Whereas in the Yellow Book standards, they pretty much anything that's not an audit is referred to as non-audit services. And so there's not any specific standards on how to do them. And generally they're pretty discouraged because the Yellow Book is again meant for external auditors. And you don't want your external auditor also consulting for management, because that's kind of what happened with, Enron and Sarbanes-Oxley and all that, right? So a couple other things that I think are key differences are the Red Book standards requires follow-up and tracking on audit recommendations that make sure that whatever recommendations we make, management is going to implement. Whereas the Yellow Book standards, typically any follow-up is done by management, and internal audit's only role in that is sort of considering that for future engagements, right? So if, based on the Yellow Book standards, if I made a recommendation to management and management chose not to do anything with it, my only recourse is to basically do the audit again. Whereas under the Red Book standards, I would have this sort of duty to follow up on these recommendations and report out to the audit committee and potentially even the commissioners if management isn't taking action on the recommendations that we're making. So I think that's a pretty important difference there as well. And then some other kind of minor things is the Red Book standards require that I consider coverage of compliance and ethics program. And so that's something that's not, the Yellow Book standards are kind of agnostic on that. They don't say that you have to, they don't say that you can't, they don't say that you should. The IIA says that you have to. So it's kind of an important thing, since I know Buncombe County cares a lot about compliance and ethics. I want to make sure that we're able to kind of evaluate our compliance and ethics office here. And then lastly, the Red Book standards requires that we do a risk assessment when developing our audit plan. That's something that our shop has always done anyway. This just kind of brings it in line with what our practice already is. The Yellow Book standards don't really talk too much about it. They sort of take the approach that, well, you're doing this audit because it's a Yellow Book audit and you have to do it. Here's how to do the audit. Whereas the Red Book standards focus a lot on how to decide what you're going to audit as well. Does that kind of make sense between the difference between the Red and the Yellow Book? Do we have any questions on that before we move on? It's a lot of information, I know, and I'm talking kind of fast, so I'm happy to answer any questions if you all have any.
The question that I have is just related to Avril, your thoughts on, and as well as if you had a chance to reach out to the external auditors.
I did, yeah. I sent them an email this morning, so I haven't heard back from them just yet.
I'm not sure if you had an opinion.
I do. Rob and I talked about that, and to his point, I think sometimes internal audit would be a great consultant because they get to see it from what's going on in the organization and give us, this is not a good idea, you should go down this path and not, but not always just an audit. So yes, I agree with Rob 100% that that's the model we should use. Buncombe County.
I appreciate your opinion and thoughts on that, and I would appreciate that external auditor's thoughts.
Yeah, like I said, I reached out to them. I don't want to put them on the spot necessarily, but when they're presenting, you can ask them as well if they have any opinions. He might not be able to give an answer, since again, you might be putting him on the spot a little bit, but we can ask him while he's here. Yeah, that's my approach. So at the next slide, I wanted to chat a little bit about the audit charter. Like I said, I've given everyone a draft of it, but my recommendation is that we adopt the Institute of Internal Auditors Global Internal Auditing Standards, aka Red Book. And the audit charter that I presented here is based on the IIA audit charter. They have like a model that they recommend that everyone should use. This one is based specifically off of the government / not-for-profit model. And I've reviewed it to make sure that it applies completely to Buncombe County. And I've had our legal counsel look over it to make sure that we're not running into any issues there. And that was that was after Crew retired. So that was Kurt that was and so this is, if we move to this model charter, that would bring us in line with the IIA Red Book standards. So I wanted to open it up at this time for discussion for the committee to kind of anybody to questions, comments. Yes.
Global means comprehensive as opposed to international then?
Both. Yeah, so the IIA is a Institute of Internal Audits. It's a global organization. So someone doing an internal audit in, Mexico or Dubai or, Africa or wherever in the world, it would be the same standards that I'd be following here in Buncombe. Yeah.
Okay.
guess I'm a little confused because I really haven't kept up with international, was it IFAS? So is there any, I mean, are these standards truly applicable to Buncombe County and the Yellow Book audits that we will have to pass?
Right, so as the internal auditor, I'm not the one who's doing the Yellow Book audits, that's kind of the external auditors that you all hire, so. Our goal in internal audit, like I said, but my kind of overarching goal as the audit director is to add value to management, and I do that through our internal audits and other services that we offer. So the IIA standards kind of maximize adding value to management by providing those services, which is why I kind of promote. There's the standards are, I think, about 200 pages long, so there's a lot in there. And they also have, I think at some point they're going to be, over time, they sort of release new kind of addendums to the standards that kind of clarify things. So the new standards came out in January of 2024 and became effective January 1st, 2025. And so they, the internal audit standards, over time, they'll release sort of like, they call them like practice guidelines, which basically helps interpret the standards a little bit. But for the time being, my understanding is that the old practice guidelines kind of apply if there's not a specific practice guideline written for the new standards.
So this would not replace anything you have now. This would be a new framework.
Yes. So one of the things that I like to say is that even, so I've reached out to some colleagues in the local government auditing space, and basically what I've gotten from feedback from them is that some of them have to use the Yellow Book standards, and some states it's required that you use the Yellow Book. North Carolina doesn't have that requirement. Texas, as an example, does have that requirement. So anybody auditing any government organization in Texas has to follow the Yellow Book standards. So a lot of those internal audit shops, they call themselves orange, so they both use the red and the Yellow Book standards. And so it's not that I think the Yellow Book standards are bad or that we're getting rid of them or anything like that. It's that I'm picking one set of standards that kind of guide our work. I still will use the Yellow Book standards as they're relevant and applicable. But the one that I'm sort of accountable to, the one that kind of is governing our work, is going to be the red book.
And this would have any impact on the COSO internal control framework that you might be using to document your internal controls? That's would be a separate.
That would be separate,
and that would not impact by this. And my understanding is that the red book and the yellow book is more of the compliance type of tape ribbon that guides Rob, not the meat that's going to guide how all the internal controls is documented.
Yes.
And so it's more of a compliance. So thank you. I support.
Yeah,
that.
You can kind of think of it as sort of like it's kind of a tool, like a bike almost, that you build that kind of ride along the road, and also the road that you're riding on, right? So it kind of helps keep you on the path of like not deviating outside of the norm too much. So like as an example, one of the things that Al mentioned earlier was that we had, when he came on the audit committee, the old county manager was on the audit committee as well. That's something that would, the IIA standards would kind of frown on as an example. So that kind of helps make sure that we're, doing the right thing as we're moving forward. If that makes sense. Does that help answer your question a little bit?
No, I wanted to say, after reading the charter that you sent us, the questions you cleared up, explaining the difference in the red and yellow book.
Okay.
So as far as I'm concerned. So,
yeah. So I mean, if we're want to follow the recommendation of the red, then I mean, this is the charter we've got to adopt.
Yes.
To me, yes,
yes. Sure. We could, you are allowed to write your own audit charter from scratch, but there's a big section in the Red Book standards that talk about what you have to add in your audit charter, and so that would, I could do that if you would like me to do that, but I think following the model charter makes the most sense. Yeah. And Avril's looked over the audit charter as well, and I think she had a couple of like minor tweaks that I put into there as well. So.
I appreciate all your.
Yes, Avril's been a great resource for me after just having started here. It's been great to have her ear and be able to bounce ideas off her and stuff. So very grateful. With that, I'll move on to kind of the risk assessment. We'll come back to the audit charter as one of our agenda items kind of for later in the meeting. Wanted to give you all kind of a chance to chew on it a little bit before we decide one way or the other. So I want to talk a little bit about the risk assessment that we did. So typically there's a few kind of ways to approach a risk assessment. And so the approach that I took for this particular risk assessment, knowing that I wanted to be able to complete a risk assessment and get an audit plan in front of the audit committee to kind of start some audit work, was sort of going with a methodology of interviewing a various number of people across the county. So there were some low-level people that we interviewed all the way up to the directors of all the departments, the ACMs, and admirals as well. So we went through and interviewed everyone in the county, got their feeling for where risk is at in their departments as well as other departments in the county. And then based on all those interviews, we compiled all that data and then came up with some projects and rated those projects based on our discussions with management and the stakeholders that we talked to. And so obviously there's some limitations in this process. There's limitations with any method that you choose to do with a risk assessment. But obviously the big limitation is that relies heavily on information from management. So if management would lie to us, that wouldn't really be reflected in our risk assessment. I don't think management is lying to us because based on the conversations I've had, everyone was incredibly open. Everyone was super receptive to internal audit coming and doing a project in their area. No one really gave us a hard time as far as that is concerned. But it also captures that risk at a point in time, which in the case of all these interviews, all of them were done before Hurricane. So obviously the risk landscape has changed quite a bit in the county. And I still think all the projects that we had, I was originally going to propose are still high risk and will likely end up on the audit plan for next fiscal year. But for this fiscal year, based on the interviews that we did, as well as updating that information in the wake of Hurricane Helene, I'm recommending an audit plan of sort of 2 projects, which one of them is a P-card audit and the other one is redoing the risk assessment for next fiscal year. So one actual audit and then the other project that we're doing is the risk assessment to propose what audits for next fiscal year as well. The P-card audit will sort of be broken into kind of 2 main chunks. The first chunk will be a review of our policies and procedures surrounding P-card, the actual kind of process of it. How are we giving out people P-cards? Are we raising and lowering people's limits? How do people get their cards taken away for policy violations? What are policy violations? That sort of thing. And the other piece will be looking at spending both pre and post Helene. Obviously, in the wake of Helene, a lot of spending was done on P-cards as we tried to get supplies that we needed immediately into the county. And I want to make sure that we've kind of covered all of our bases as far as following the rules in the wake of Hurricane Helene. But I want to do some review of pre-Helene as well, because if we notice that there's a bunch of issues in post-Helene world, I want to make sure we can compare and contrast with pre-Helene to see if it was the storm that caused all these issues or if it's a more systemic kind of problem. So that's kind of what I'll be doing with the P-card audit, and it'll be very data driven. I plan on using a lot of, we have Power BI at the county, anyone can use it. So I plan on using Power BI as well as Excel to do a lot of data analytics and that sort of thing, which will be a little bit out of my comfort zone. I'm used to using a software called Idea. So this will be my first project in Power BI, but I'm pretty comfortable with Excel, and Power BI is just kind of a plugin for Excel. So I'm not too worried about the technical piece of it. And then obviously redoing the risk assessment. One of the things I plan to do is sort of develop a risk universe for the county. It's a difficult situation because I don't necessarily want to replace the ERM process that risk management is working on. That's their piece, and I'm not going to go step on their toes as far as that's concerned, but I want to be able to have my own risk universe so that way as we go to do a risk assessment, we can be a little bit more thorough, if that sort of makes sense. So like I said, one of the items that we'll go to later on in the meeting as well in the agenda is approval of this audit plan if you all are comfortable with it. Any questions about this audit plan as I've sort of presented it? Yes.
What are some examples of your risk criteria and levels of severity?
Yeah, so I think this was something that we talked about when I way back ago when I did the interview. Right? Typically, I view risk as sort of, I think the best way to kind of consider it is sort of as a likelihood and an impact rating. So likelihood kind of tells you, okay, on a scale of basically I go 1 to 3, low, medium, high. Is it very unlikely, kind of likely, or incredibly likely to happen? And then the impact, which is, okay, if it does happen, what does that mean, right? And so those 2 kind of factors together give us our total risk kind of rating of low, medium, high, or critical. If something is incredibly high likelihood to happen and incredibly high impact, that's something that we would call a critical risk. And so, for example, I think Helene is a good example. I think the likelihood of Helene happening to us was incredibly low. but obviously the impact was catastrophic, incredible. Right, another good example might be someone, sneaking out of the office 5 minutes early. People are doing that all the time, I'm certain, but the impact of that's incredibly low, right? I mean, it's 5 minutes of time theft, right? At the end of the day, that's not, we're not like, trying to police people over 5 minutes, and so there's sort of, but then, there are other things that kind of raise to a critical level. I think, coming from the higher ed world, athletics is always a good example that I kind of point to as a critical risk, right? The likelihood that one of those coaches is doing something they're not supposed to is incredibly high. And depending on what that coach is doing, the impact could also be incredibly high. If the NCAA disqualifies you from tournament play, that's so much money your school loses out on. And so I think those are good examples of like kind of critical risks. So as far as the P card stuff is concerned, I'll sort of rate all of the recommendations that we make in our internal audits as low, medium, high, or critical, with the kind of caveat being that most of the time the low risk stuff won't make it into an audit report because I'm not going to waste you all's time with something that I deem to be incredibly low risk. I will bring it up to management and let management know so that way they can address it, but I'm not going to be putting those in the audit reports. Typically, the lowest I would be willing to put in there is a medium risk. Unless you all would like me to put in all the low risk items, I'm happy to do that, but I value your time and don't want to flog the reports and have them be 100 pages long. So does that help answer your question a little bit? Fantastic.
I appreciate, I think the risk assessment, updated risk assessment is probably the biggest part.
Yeah.
So we can know what direction we're going in. And I'm wondering, are there a few areas that they would consider inherently risky that automatically without, that maybe we should look at first if we're going to be kind of throwing darts at a dartboard, that maybe we can hit one of the ones that have already been deemed.
Yeah, I think P card is a great example, right? It's, I always tell people when you're doing sort of a fraud investigation, the thing that you have to look for is what is something, how quickly can someone convert it into cash, and how valuable is that resource, right? A credit card with someone like with the county's name on it that you can spend $10,000 on is basically $10,000 in cash. And $10,000 is quite a bit of money, right? Whereas you might have this table might be worth $500, but my ability to get this table into my car and sell it is kind of difficult to do. And so you kind of have to think about how likely it is that someone converts something to cash. So P card is always going to be high risk. I think in most places, I think a sheriff's office is oftentimes going to be a high risk area just because it's an elected official, and anytime you're dealing with elected officials, and for the same reason, Register of Deeds, which is also an elected official, I think those are always going to be kind of carry some inherent risk. And then whether or not we've addressed those risks determines whether or not there's any residual risk left over. Without having done an evaluation really of those two departments heavily specifically, it's hard to know how much internal controls they've put into place, but I think sheriff's office is always going to be high risk, I think, just by the nature of their work. I mean, I sort of, when I think about risk, I think a lot of times people tend to think of it in terms of financial risk, but I try to think of risk as a much more holistic package, right? And one of the things that I consider as risk is likelihood of harm. And obviously in the sheriff's office, they are constantly in likelihood, right? And so I think when I think about risk, I try not to just think about the financial impact. So I think sheriff's office is a great example of someone that's always going to have a lot of sort of inherent risk just because of the work that they do. Same thing with EMS. And so I think there's a number of kind of low-hanging fruit departments that if I was not doing a risk assessment, I think I could just draw names out of a hat and easily pick those. HR is another good example just because, the number of people that work for Buncombe County, that's a huge operation, right, to run the HR department for us. So I think those are some good examples of kind of low-hanging fruit ones that are always going to be risky.
Each one of those was at the department level, and there might be a few that are overarching, such as journal entries, and so that might be another area that can inherently that we look at those overarching.
Yeah, and I think the same thing. Journal entries is another good example, just because the amount of money that flows through those is always going to have a lot of inherent risk. Based on conversations I've had with our finance team, it seems like they've got a good set of controls in place, but I've not actually tested those controls. That's just based on conversations I've had. So.
Yeah, would you classify those as documented controls? How you normally process this? It is.
I think there's space for improvement in the documentation of those controls, but we do have strong systems in place, and we're working to constantly improve the systems themselves, but also the documentation of those controls.
This is a pretty generic question, but are the reconciliations of the P cards done within finance, or are they done departmentally? And then if there's a challenge brought to you, how is that reconciliation managed on a monthly basis, I guess?
And I have a thought.
Thing is, we have a procurement office, and I
Okay.
believe that the people that do the reconciliations they do their own. I don't know whether or not they audit.
Yeah, so there is a hybrid approach, like many things in our organization. Right now, the actual entry and posting of the transaction happens at the department level with multiple levels of review. There is some procurement engagement with initial transactions, especially when we have suppliers that we haven't purchased before.
Sure.
And then there is an ongoing kind of monthly regular statement recon of, statements. Obviously, we've already, the transaction is complete at the time of the swipe, but we are paying our bills. There's level reconciliation going on in the procurement office. I know the goal of that team, though, is to be more engaged in the depth of those reconciliations. So yes.
And that's not to spoil the audit report that you'll be getting at the next meeting, but that's one of the recommendations that I'm having is the review that the procurement office takes. They do 50 transactions at random across all of the P cards in the entire county, and that's their monthly kind of review. As they get this report, 50 at random, and that's what they look at. There's some other review. I know one of our employees looks at Amazon transactions whenever he sees them, just because those are always going to be high risk. But as far as like formal documented process, it's those 50, and that's kind of it. So I'm actually going to recommend that they take more of a risk-based approach in there and look at things like dollar amount and vendor rather than just 50 at random.
Are they
So-
required to submit receipts and things
Yes.
to go with P cards?
They are, and there's also, depending on the type of transaction, there's also some additional documentation that's required. But one of the things that we noted in this special project that we did was sometimes that documentation was lacking. And when I say sometimes, I mean, in this particular department, it was almost all transactions did not have all of the required documentation. They all had receipts, but they didn't necessarily have the other pieces of documentation that were required. So.
I didn't want to get in the weeds, but I know that
Yeah.
that's just kind of a piece of it. It's the underneath of that kind of stuff, but it's also the proof and the documentation to support. what you're
Yeah,
saying.
and I think the difficulty with P cards is that, and Macy, maybe you can speak to this a little more better than I can, but some of the difficulty is a lot of it's kind of driven at the department level. And so in a big department like Health and Human Services, there might be 7 or 8 layers of review. But in a small department like internal audit, if my one staff auditor, Lisa is her name, if she had a P card and she bought something, it would then come to me to review, and that would kind of be the end of the review, unless it was a new vendor or triggered one of those 50 at random. And so if I do have a P card for the county, but if I didn't have a P card for the county and I directed her to make a purchase, that's still kind of a gap that we identified in that report as well. Is okay, if in this case, if I tell her to make a transaction, she makes it, it comes to me for approval, there's really no extra layer beyond that. And so that's something that we're recommending that the finance department look at as well. So spoilers for you all, because I know I haven't presented those findings to you, sorry to blindside you like that, but
I think it's been on our list for a while. Capacity is always a challenge, so we're grateful for somebody doing the work, and then we can kind of pick it up from there. I think that very often the benefits and challenges of a program are the same, right? So P cards make things simple and expedient, but also create these challenges.
That's it, makes sense. Yep,
there's a balance between convenience and risk.
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Didn't we do I mean, this is a little bit different, but didn't they do an audit of all the cash procedures and so forth already?
We did,
in
and
the
we were
past.
a step away from presenting you all with a revised policy right before the storm got here. So that's something we hope to bring to you.
Okay, so that didn't get quite completed yet. Okay.
We were talking before a lot of changes happened about grants,
Yes.
because we see a lot of, I know at the commission level, we're concerned because we have so many grants coming in.
Yes.
And we were concerned that could be one area we really look at.
Yes.
Yeah.
Grants are always a risk, and truthfully, I was one of the projects I was initially considering for this kind of audit plan was a contracts audit, and planning on sort of, if the contract was grant funded, paying particular attention to those when I do my sampling. But like I said, the kind of Helene threw a wrench in a lot of that. And I've done grants audits before in the past at the universities that I've worked at, so I'm somewhat familiar with the OMB super circular and some of the guidance that's around it. But a grants audit is obviously a huge undertaking. I know it was something that the old audit director, when he was here, not Matt Baker, but the kind of the previous audit director was planning on doing, but never got around to it. And when he was planning on doing that, there was no sort of grants manager position at the county. Since that time, the county hadn't hired a grants manager, so there's one person full-time who's looking at that. Which kind of, the fact that there is someone dedicated to that kind of lowered some of the risk on my end a little bit, kind of when I looked at the overall picture of things.
One way to, go ahead.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I have to step out. I just got a call from work that I have
Yes.
to step away, but I too read the charter and glad to see that we're making that transition, and I think it's a good management piece between what the state requires, but also what our internal controls should look like. So I did just want to give that feedback because I did take the time to do that, and
Yeah,
want to
thank
commend you on that effort. And please excuse me, take my apologies for.
No, I totally understand. Thank you so much.
Sorry.
I was gonna give one suggestion just to kind of is maybe as a beginning point is to look at grants from a whole rather than looking at a specific grant from a departmental wide.
Yeah.
And I'm sure these are the type of things that you feel a lot of confidence that you're already doing. And from an internal, you want to start testing those things that you feel confident would pass. So do we have grant documentation from a general standpoint, and how is it being housed and backup and documented and then from that point, you can start going from a specific, okay, now for this specific grant, that's documented. So it might be looking at it from a broad standpoint, might be able to kind of satisfy some of those concerns that, I'll express or that I might have or other people might have.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is challenging around that is the timing, right?
Right.
So we have this new grant manager coming on board. We don't want to jump in on her first day and ding her for not having any of this documentation on her first day. So giving her some time to get established before doing it out, but you don't want to wait too long because it's obviously a risky area. So balancing all those things is a challenge, to put it lightly. And I've not spoken with her since Hurricane Helene, so I don't know if she's even doing grant work. I assume she's still doing grant work because, like you said, we had all those grants coming in part for Helene. But yeah, no, I completely agree. Those low hanging fruit kind of things that like, it's pretty easy to say, do we have this? Yes or no. And if you don't have it, that's obviously kind of a big concern.
She had it really.
Right. I think she started around the same time I did.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So she's been here less than.
Yeah.
So one way of thinking about it is maybe one high arching type of thing, maybe it's grants or journal entries.
Yeah.
One that's maybe a little bit more specific to kind of get used to the software, like the P cards. And then going back to that risk assessment, analysis sounds like a big year.
Yeah, and that's the thing is we're already halfway through the year, right? And at this point, it's just going to be me. And so if I want to dedicate the time to this risk assessment, I'm only really going to be able to physically complete one other project.
That raises one other question that I had here in terms of because of the hiring freeze and the budget that we have, are we able to divert those funds toward temporary contract workers to give Rob some assistance or resources? Is that I'm not sure if that's.
I asked our budget director, John, about that, and he was kind of gave a non-committal but leaning towards no answer. I think without an official ask from the governing board, he wasn't really wanting to engage deeply with the question. But I think he's the way that the salaries and some other items are considered like non-discretionary spending essentially, and that non-discretionary spending is locked up pretty much. And so they're kind of relying on the fact that I'm not filling those two positions to kind of balance the budget a little bit, because that money's already been set aside, those positions are frozen, the salary's not going towards them, and so all of those funds will be going back towards the offsetting of the loss of revenue from taxes being down.
We're just now getting into our FY26 budget planning. We had our retreat on Thursday of last week. Of course, we've got some hot topics on our 5 p.m. agenda with budget reductions as well for FY25. It hurts right now, how challenging the finances are. if we can get funds flowing from the state and federal resources, it will ease up our budget a bit. We just don't know when that's gonna happen. And that is the biggest challenge. So, and I know, Rob, this is tough. This is tough on every single staff person to have to do, I hate the phrase more with less, but it's kind of where we are right now. And we, as a commission, I certainly don't want to speak for Al, but we recognize how hard this is and really do appreciate the sacrifices that our staff are making in our department heads to help us get through the tight times.
And-
It's better.
Yeah, and what we are afraid, we don't want to get in a position where contracts are offsetting what we're trying to do with freeze.
Right.
And I've been through that before in my life. It's back, we did a lot of cuts when we were merging. But that's the one thing too. But on the other hand, we want to make sure that the critical areas, we're not being first responders and all that, we're not touching. We can't afford to. But this is going to be painful.
It's hard to say.
But as Al said, just as an FYI for this group, our public safety positions, sheriff's deputies, paramedics, 911, those are not frozen because we have to have those people respond. I think that's the third siren since we've been in this morning, so. And I think the reality for you, Rob, is not biting off more than you could chew right now, really figuring out what that one project is.
And I would love to
moving
have
into-
more, and like I said, I was planning on before Helene happened,
Although I wouldn't, higher ed grants fundraising is, that's my jam, that's what I do. I wouldn't let the gas pedal off of that as a project down the road because it does get really risky.
And when I go to do the risk assessment, I plan on meeting with all of you on the audit committee one-on-one for this next fiscal year as well. And we can kind of hash out, okay, should it be a contracts audit that covers grants, or should it be a specific grants audit? What makes most sense? And we can kind of have those discussions at that time as well, for sure. Because I agree, I don't want to let grants go. I think grants are grants are one of those things, like I mentioned, like athletics and higher ed, that is always going to be a high risk area because it's a lot of money oftentimes, it's a lot of other people's money oftentimes, and other people want you to spend their money the way that they want, so.
You do ask a great question.
Yeah, that was a good question.
Well, in light of seeing that you're gonna be a Department of One yourself, and it seems like mostly writing documentation that we're looking for, is there anything that we can do to help make things more comfortable for you in your position, knowing that there's not another employee along the way? Is there?
Yeah, so when I was hired with the assumption that I'd be here in the office 5 days a week, and I have thus far been doing that. Most people in the county are allowed a sort of hybrid schedule, but obviously the committee, when I was hired, wanted me to be here 5 days a week, I think in part because of the kind of paying for the sins of my predecessor a little bit, which is understandable. And so
Good way of putting it.
Yeah.
I would be, especially in the meantime, I'm still planning on going to a lot of in-person meetings, but especially on days where I don't have meetings, if I could do a hybrid schedule 1 or 2 days a week at home. If that's something the audit committee would support, I'd be willing to kind of take that to April and get her opinion as well. And if both of you were in support of that, that's something that would, make my life definitely a lot easier for sure. Traffic can be bad at 5 PM in Asheville, so.
Well, that makes sense in light of that there not being staff people that you're overseeing on a daily basis, and something that would be temporarily, considering that one staff is coming, that he would be site. I could support that, but I'll leave it to you all.
I forgot about that 5 days.
Yeah.
It's a great point, though, not super.
Yeah, that's a good point.
With the documentation work ahead of you, sometimes those days at home you can knock out.
Yeah, you have to know I'm very extroverted. I like to talk to people, and so sometimes I find myself in hallway conversations for a lot longer than I probably should be in them. And so, yeah.
I'll get results, not time.
Yeah. And hopefully there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of this P card audit for you all and for management as well.
I was just gonna say, hallway conversations for internal audit are fabulous.
Yes.
Because you learn people, you learn risks, you learn what some people's pain points are.
Yeah.
And you make connections. And one thing internal audit for Buncombe County has tried to do is be a helper to the county, not the like slap you.
Yes, yes, and that's very much my approach as well, to internal audit. I built a lot of great relationships with my colleagues at CSU Pueblo when I was there. And one of the vice presidents actually called my personal cell phone one day because she thought someone was like committing fraud, and like she would have never done that if not for the relationship that we had built. So I very much value those relationships. Those hallway conversations, I think, are part of the job a little bit, but it's hard where you're in the middle of a task you're trying to get done and you get distracted by talking to people. It's a difficult thing for sure.
I definitely see how that presence would be needed, but it sounds like you're right now at the beginning of the documentation of this kind of structural part that more later, always.
Yeah. Well, if the audit committee isn't supportive, I'll reach out to Avril and get her opinion as well. I don't want to, unilaterally kind of.
Yeah, I think
Rob, if we, don't do it.
Let's,
until you have employees, I mean,
Yeah.
that can change it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, so I think when we have our next meeting, which is the 24th, will be sometime in April, we can evaluate, see if the hiring freeze has been lifted and kind of
yeah,
evaluate.
We didn't know.
and you can report on what you and Avril discussed about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think I've had my next one-on-one with her, and so I have some questions for you all as a committee, and then I have an opportunity to kind of open discussion, any questions that you all have for me. So first off is kind of reporting cadence or frequency. How often do you want to hear from me? Do you just want to hear from me at the meetings? Do you want email updates? Do you want, a sort of summary of what I've been working on? What is it that you all are looking for as far as updating from me? I want to make sure I'm kind of reporting to you all at whatever is most valuable to you. If you want an email once a month, I'm happy to give that. If that's way too much and you want to hear it from me at the meetings, I'm happy to do that as well. I don't want to blow up your inboxes, but I want to make sure that you're informed and engaged with what's going on.
Why don't we do it this way? Why don't you start out how you think you need to communicate with us? And if we think it's too much, we'll tell you if we need more.
I'm okay with
I
that.
think that would be, because that's you need to get. Yeah, what works for you,
Yeah.
and we can,
Yeah, happy to do that.
yeah.
So the next question is, when I go to actually issue the audit reports, the management obviously gets a full copy of the report. Avril will get a copy of all the reports, as well as any sort of relevant people that are being addressing in the audit reports. Do you all want full copies of the reports, or would you rather me kind of draft a summary for you? My last position, the audit committee only wanted the summaries because we were, it was a huge department. There were 12 of us, and so we were putting out several audits a month oftentimes. Probably not going to happen here with just me right now. So I'd recommend, if you think you can commit the time, I'd like to provide you with the full reports and kind of let you dig into them as you see fit. But if providing a summary would be more valuable for you all, I'm happy to do that as well.
Can we have both? Like a lot of things I've
Yeah.
seen, it's got an executive summary, and then you can go into the meat.
Yep, absolutely. And that's something that one of the items I'll put on our next agenda as well. I'll present the audit report kind of as I've done it. And then I'll kind of get feedback from you all about what more information do you want? Is there too much? Is there not enough? And we can kind of hash those things out of the next meeting when I have an actual completed audit report for you.
So if you reference more to it, you might say how lengthy your summary is.
Yeah.
Rob, I think it would be good, in doing that reporting, to make sure that you send it to all the commissioners.
All the commissioners
Just
as
not
well.
the two.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So next up is setting expectations. I think having expectations in the right place are incredibly important, because it makes sure that you all are getting from me what you want from me, and that I'm not disappointing you or letting you down. So I wanted to get a feeling for what it is that you all are expecting from internal audit and from me as the director, kind of as a committee. I figured we'd have, rather than kind of ping, I figured we'd just kind of go down the line and have everyone kind of say what it is that you're kind of looking for from internal audit. What are your expectations for?
Don't let us get any surprise.
Yeah.
yeah, I'm gonna agree, that no surprises.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm just learning too, so.
Yeah.
I may have something for you next.
Yeah, absolutely. And feel free to reach out if you think.
But I think now, doing it,
Yeah, I agree, no surprises, and I think you're early on, where both sides are just trying to figure out a way through this, and, I think it's probably a little early to set real specific expectations. I mean, keep doing your thing, and if we don't like it, say, well, let's tweak this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wouldn't say these are expectations, but to kind of help paint maybe a little bit more of a vision of maybe something in the future that we can kind of aim for.
Yeah.
I would like to see maybe some type of combination of the framework of internal controls in such a way that each quarter we can see the policies that you are observing. And that way we can check both boxes, that there is a policy and it's functioning. And so that would be kind of like thinking at the end, that's all we would be doing is going through that policy. Is it functioning, and getting your reports on, on those. So, but kind of going where we are at right now, I know it's far away from that.
Yeah. Did you have a comment, Kelly?
If it's all right with you guys, I'd kind of like to provide a little update from risk management on COSO. So in last fiscal year, risk management implemented a software solution for our claims and insurance management because we were in the mid-2000s, like really, really bad. Like it was horrifying. I couldn't even run reports. I had to manually create reports in Excel. So we did that. I'm so very grateful, because if we had not had that software for Helene, we would be in a very, very bad place.
Oh, that's right.
We would be in a very bad place had we not implemented that software in June. The COSO component of that software was scheduled to be this fiscal year. However, with Helene, not only did that take risk management resources, there's two of us. I'm doing primarily Helene stuff right now and vehicle accidents. And then the person that works with me, she's doing mostly workers' comp claims. And I do all the workers' comp legal cases as well. But so with our capacity resources and with the county trying to taper back on spending, we've kind of put the COSO piece of our software on hold. So that's where we are, just to kind of bring you guys up to speed, because, and I apologize, I haven't reviewed the new charter, but I know the old charter had the committee having some oversight over governance, risk, and compliance. And so I wanted to give you that update from risk management as well. We do have a very good insurance broker, and our insurance carrier for property insurance has been very responsive. They've actually been sending us a little bit of advance money for some of our property damage claims. So we're tracking pretty good as far as recouping some of our big expenses from the losses we sustained county, to county facilities. But all that to say, COSO right now is not slated for this fiscal year, starting that process.
Have you all decided where internal audit and risk begin and end with COSO?
So COSO is a management-driven function. So that is one reason that, honestly, I think that's one reason I got the risk manager job, is to put that COSO knowledge in a management chain, because internal audit has to remain independent. They cannot implement COSO and then audit it, which was historically the problem. COSO was on a board resolution in October of 2017. COSO knowledge lived in internal audit and can't implement an audit. So pulling some of that COSO knowledge into risk management.
Okay, so you've got it separate.
We've got it separated. So it'll become a risk management function. Now it's just a question. And then Rob will partner and do his audits based on the Red Book standards and pulling in the COSO standards. And we'll work very closely on things.
Yeah, if you think of kind of the, I guess you going back to my bicycle and road analogies, standards, COSO is sort of like the gear that you might be in on your bike, right? So it's It doesn't change the bike, it doesn't change the road, it just kind of gears in exactly how you're doing it. It's an analogy is kind of falling apart, I apologize. But it doesn't impact the standards that we're following are kind of neutral towards COSO. It does say that management should adopt a framework, and so great work management in adopting COSO. Now implementing COSO is a difficult thing, but once that implementation has happened and management has fully adopted COSO, our audits will sort of take that approach to internal controls, if that makes sense, when we're evaluating the controls. And then did you have anything for expectations?
Yeah, I'd say when you were mentioning the strategic plan, that's sort of what I'm looking for your vision, your strategic plan, because you have I mean, it's been decades since I took the county management course, but I know how incredibly complex the situation is and how things feed in together and are coordinated. Now, and that's what I've been looking for, is say, how are you gonna get your hands on the reins? That's like the stagecoach is running towards the cliff and we're saying, okay, come on, Rob, get the reins on the stagecoach.
Yeah, and I think in that same vein, one of the things that I was originally hoping to do next fiscal year, but because there's a kind of financial component associated with it, I think it makes sense to wait until fiscal 27 rather than fiscal 26, is kind of doing the quality assurance. And if you're not familiar with that, it's sort of like who audits the auditors? Well, the QAR is for auditing auditors, right? You get people, like kind of your colleagues who understand the standards as well as understand your work. So I'd be looking for people who are certified internal auditors that are working in government in other counties and cities across the country, and having them come in and kind of evaluate our internal audit shop. Typically those services, you sort of, the kind of, it's not written down formally anywhere, but oftentimes in local government and higher ed, it's kind of, you kind of do those at no cost, but the company that you're evaluating pays for the travel, basically. And so like, those people wouldn't be compensated for their time, we wouldn't have like a contract to them necessarily, but we'd have to pay for their travel to come out here. They'd want to sit down with the committee and chat with you all, they want to talk to Avril, they want to talk to the ACM, probably the commissioner broadly. There's a number of things they would need to do in addition to actually reviewing our work papers and our audit manuals, that sort of thing. It's the IA standards required every 5 years. The Yellow Book standards actually require one every 3 years. There's not ever been one completed for our audit shop. Is that your understanding as well?
So the first departmental strategic plan had us going through the steps for our first peer review, but with so much turnover in directors over the years, that just never happened. So we have not done an official peer review.
So I'll develop a strategic plan, but sort of with the knowledge and mindset that once we complete the QAR should have some recommendations that inform the strategic plan, and I'll update the strategic plan at that time. So I intend to do a strategic plan. I've kind of drafted a sort of departmental strategic plan a little bit. It's still in draft form. I'm working with our strategy and innovation department to get some feedback from them. But I've kind of started that process of drafting a strategic plan. Hopefully I'll be able to present it to you. If not, next committee meeting, the one after that, depending on how much time strategy and innovation has. They've very stretched thin as well. Some of those S&I folks were in the warehouse with me. My last day in the warehouse when I left, there was still someone from strategy and innovation in the warehouse. So I think he's out now, my understanding, but I'm not sure. So, and then the last thing I had for you all as a question is, and this is something that I hope never comes up. I hope this never happens. I never have to go down this route, but I want to make sure that we have this established just in case, is what do we want to talk about as far as escalation procedures go? So let's say, for example, I present a risk to management and management says, nope, I'm comfortable with that risk. We're going to accept that risk and move on with it. At what point do you all want to be informed of that? If it's a low risk item, is that something that you care about? I'd say maybe not as much. Obviously, if it's a critical risk item that I've deemed and management accepting that risk, obviously I would kind of be bringing that to you either way. But I kind of want to know, at what point do you all want those procedures? And then at what point do you want me to bring it to the committee first and then let the committee bring it to the commissioners? Or would you rather me bring it to the committee and the commissioners at the same time? Kind of what does that look like? What is the committee's feelings on that?
I would say initially, no matter what level it is, that maybe the first communication would be with the chair and maybe the commissioners, and then we discuss whether, what do we think? You know, and certainly if there's any, if it's of any import, then at least the committee needs to know about it, of course, and maybe a special meeting. I mean, we're sort of guessing at the situation.
Right, and like I said, hopefully this never comes up.
Yeah.
I've always had escalation procedures in my audit work. I've only ever had to use them one time, and it was not a fun experience for anybody involved.
No.
So,
Well, we want to be mindful of those, you know, your intuition and other factors that might not be showing up on paper.
yeah. Kind of a best judgment sort of scenario.
Yeah, I think so. Like I say, hopefully, we all hope we're not there.
Fingers crossed. Hopefully that never has to happen. I've never done it. There's a bit of an internal audit generally, and so I don't think we're gonna run into that issue. But there's always a possibility, right? You never know what's gonna, you know, we didn't think Helene was gonna happen, and
Right.
here we are, so.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts?
My thought was maybe, even if it's a low priority thing, in a way, I'd like to know, to see a pattern over time. Is there one department that seems to have a lot of little problems?
Yeah.
That they aren't
Willing to fix?
unwilling to fix, and then to investigate? Well, is it, they're just an ego thing, or do they have so many other problems, other priorities, that maybe we need to be looking at something else? So I'd like to sort of, and in this committee, we can just, I'd like to see it, the lower escalation before it goes up to the, if you're talking about me taking it to the commissioners on the committee, yes, but I can't see taking it to the full board unless we think,
Right.
we need to take a closer look at this.
And I tend to agree with that, with the, Al was obviously here through the darkest of dark days in Buncombe County, and I came in on the tail end of that. The rest of the commissioners have come in after things were much better. So I think those escalations coming to the committee that includes Alan makes the most sense.
Yeah.
Before elevating it to the rest of the commission.
Yeah, no, that makes
So
sense.
may also not have the context that we have us.
Yeah, and if it's one of those things where I bring it to the committee, you all very much agree that the whole commissioners need to be aware of that, we can move it at that point. For sure.
Because that's the way it started, because when it started with me was procurement card things, baby clothes on procurement cards.
Yeah.
The county manager, and there were the little things, you know, and it was, well, oh, that's not important enough to take the commission. Oh, it was a mistake. Oh, it was, you know, all these excuses, but then it grew and it grew. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah, the pattern, that's what I'm saying. I'd like to.
You can understand how you might have a recognition with the finance department and Admiral, but definitely nobody outside of that department should be having any kind of influence. Any influence you should.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And this is something that wasn't on our slide, but it's something I wanted to just kind of chat with as well, was in that same vein of escalation procedures. If we do have to do a fraud investigation, we had one come up back in August. That's that special project that I referenced. I reached out to Bill to kind of inform him that I was doing this investigation and that I would be, you know, providing an update as needed. That's sort of historically what I've gone to in the past, and before our first meeting, so I didn't have an opportunity to get you all's opinion on it, but now that I have the opportunity, is that something that you all are comfortable with if I sort of inform the chair that we have a fraud investigation going on, and then obviously when it's completed, kind of bring that to the whole committee? Is that something everyone's comfortable with?
Yeah.
All right, well, that was pretty much it as far as my presentation goes. I have opportunities for questions if you all have any questions for me.
I did, were you able to complete just your normal review in terms of your 60-90 day or the normal Buncombe County review process?
Yeah, so it's twice a year. So the first one opens up in January and the next one in July. So it's opened up, and I'll go in and sort of do a self-evaluation, and then it goes to what Workday considers to be my supervisor, which is Admiral Day. She'll review it. As far as the annual review, that's something that my understanding happens in July. It's something that the committee kind of drives the process on, as far as the review of my performance as the director. So.
One of the questions that you helped answer for me, but I think it was one that I wanted to make sure that you had a chance to keep the committee updated, which is on your continuing professional education.
Yeah.
And what are you required to have? And did you meet your requirements for 2024? What do you have in plan for 2024?
Yeah, so I am 2024, I did meet all my requirements. The certified fraud examiner requires 20 CPEs a year, and 10 of those CPEs have to be fraud related. The IIA requires 40 a year, and 2 of those have to be ethics related. So if I do 40 a year, 10 are fraud, 2 are ethics, I've got my CPE taken care of. Kind of similar for CPA, which is I think 80 every 2 years, depending on the state, or 40 a year.
That's yellow, I think.
Is it okay?
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a long time, but 40 hours a year.
Yeah,
for
so,
CPA, yeah.
Yeah, so that's where I'm at for CPE for 2024. For 2025, one of the things that I've fought for to kind of keep is being able to maintain my professional development like funding for internal audit, because I need that to maintain my certification. So even though funding is being cut, I am maintaining that spending still. So I am attending a conference, Association of Local Government Auditors, later this year in May. And I actually was reached out to someone at the who's doing a presentation on kind of disaster response. Called Kelly kicked him over to me because she's not an internal audit anymore. And he asked me to kind of sit on a panel and talk about what happened with Helene, how that impacted our audit shop and all that kind of stuff. And offhandedly, I just mentioned to him that like, oh yeah, I'm happy to find public speaking. I've actually presented at conferences before. I have like a sort of presentation on how to do a fraud investigation that I've given out. And he's like, oh, I think they would love that. And so he reached out to the committee, and so now they want me to do this fraud presentation as well. So I'll be presenting on fraud as well as kind of sitting on this disaster response panel. And so that'll be, I think it's about 20 CPEs for that one. And then the other 20 I'll just kind of find through like online, relatively inexpensive courses to kind of save some funding while still getting my CPE. There's one person who he has great CPE and a lot of it's kind of fraud centric, which is always super interesting to me, as well as he's very kind of driving the, I very much view him as like driving the internal audit conversation forward and kind of always trying to innovate and do better. His CPE is great, so I'll probably go to some of his webinars that he does as well. So to kind of get to my 40 minutes here.
That's great. I want to make sure that
Yeah, it's good question.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
just one follow-up question. How do you track your CPE? Is there a Buncombe County software? Is there another tracking mechanism?
I just use the spreadsheet. The title of the presentation, the date, how many CPEs it was, and then I just add it up, make sure I've got my 40, and then both of them just require like a little, you check the box online, and then if randomly you're selected for audit, you have to provide the certificates to prove. In all my years of being certified, I've never had either organization ask. So
Yeah, we should maybe find a place to have.
I think I did change the vote. Yeah, I'll get asked this.
That's how I track them too.
Yeah.
Just have a spreadsheet.
That's pretty common
Yeah.
from what I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be good to have that housed someplace on
Yeah, I keep it on this computer.
maybe somewhere that the county can have that document.
Any other questions for me for internal audit broadly? Very long presentation, I know, but it's our first committee meeting, so I wanted to make sure we talk about a bunch of stuff. So I appreciate you all's patience.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mason, I'm sorry you had to sit through all that, but I think we're ready for external audit update. Yeah.
The auditors aren't coming in themselves.
They, my understanding is they were unable to be here in person, so they are coming.
We've had some last minute adjustments. He generally would prefer to be here in person. We're gonna call this a tech check, like now too. Tim, can you hear us? And can you? Just volume.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I can hear you guys just fine. Mason, can you all hear me?
Yes, sir. And so I'm gonna present this external audit update in 2 parts. I'm gonna give you the presentation and talk to the second part. Rob shared several materials with you all here. You know, there should be a printout for everyone. So we'll grab it.
Yeah, that was one of the ones in the email as well.
This one, did everybody get one?
And Tim, you should be able to share your screen now. We're working on getting that viewable in the room, but in the meantime, we do have printed copies for people to follow along with.
And while we're waiting for him to load, so again, gonna discuss the external audit update in two parts today. One is an amendment to the contract, and then we'll look to Tim for an actual audit report update. So just an intro update, overview. I know there's been a lot of churn and we have not been in the room together for quite a while. Obviously, we as a local government are required to have an external financial audit every year by an outside qualified accounting firm familiar with local government audit. We selected Malden & Jenkins' current audit firm with competitive process in 2023. The fiscal 24 audit represents the second year that they have audited us, both the general county audit and also the single audit of our grant program, since we're spending more than $500,000 state, federal, or grant money and $750,000 in federal grant money. Our base contract with Malden & Jenkins includes 5 major programs on that grant single audit side. During the audit this year, they identified 3 additional programs. And so we had to increase the amount of contract. The total cost of the additional audit for those programs is $23,000, taking our contract up to $215,000 for the year. So our proposed contract amendment will increase that cost. The other reason for the contract amendment is to extend the deadline. So we're very close and on track to being on the targeted deadline this year. Hurricane Helene got here, we kind of lost our place in line. They had to work on some other things. So we are extending the contract through the 31st of this month. Everything is complete. We are finalizing the paper after document to submit to the state, but all the work is done. We have audit reports in hand as of today, but we just want to extend the timeline to make sure that we have space. So that's the first item. The contract. I believe we included that in the documentation that was shared with you all. I'll also leave a paper copy with Mr. Crick today for signature. We'll take that to the board this evening, but I was hoping for discussion and or a vote so that we have on the record that you all confirm and approve that.
None of the any of these delays. I know the first year we were delayed, not by us or them.
Right.
It's information from a third.
Right. The actuary was a big one. We went with a new vendor this year. I think we had great success with
power on.
Both
USB enabled.
The reporting schedule. I think they were one of the first, one of the earliest in our process to kind of get us information this year. So everything went really well. I think really it was just the storm that gave us this year. So,
How is the LGC okay with all this?
yeah, so we've been in communication with them. They actually reached out early as soon as we had connectivity back. They said, we understand you all on the western side of the impact, just let us know. We reached out and said, we know this is going to be a thing, we're trying, and they said, that's okay, just stay in touch, and we have done that. Yeah. Okay.
So do we need I guess we need a vote on that.
Yes, please, essentially design.
Is there any other questions from anybody on the committee about that?
And the additional money has been allocated or found or?
Correct, we do have the budget. We have left ourselves a little space because there's been a lot of movement in our grant programs. The last few years, we always know there's gonna be 5, but y'all know this, like there's a lot of grant money moving. There's gonna be a lot more. And so to a degree, we somewhat anticipated. So we have 5 programs. We knew about the 2 additional early ones. The last one kind of snuck up on us due to some new guidance, understanding of guidance from the state. The opioid settlement funds are something that kind of continues to evolve for us. And you'll hear about that from Tim. But yes, we do have the funds in place.
Okay, I just didn't want Amanda to tear out her hair.
I want the process.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Is there a motion then?
So
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay, thank you. I'll leave a document with you or Rob for a signature.
Yeah.
And I'll hand it off to Tim now. He's gonna walk you through the actual audit reports and their notes and findings. I do want to kind of steal the thunder and say we do have clean opinions in the general county audit, the single audit. After this one, I would also ask for some sort of action on the record to approve or accept the audit so that we can move it forward to the commission.
Okay.
And with that, Tim, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thanks, Mason, and good morning, everybody. I do apologize that I'm not able to be there in person, and trust me when I say I would much rather be there in person with you all. I decided to start off 2025 by rupturing my left Achilles tendon on January 3rd playing tennis with my wife, and so this is not exactly how I envisioned January starting off, but I appreciate the flexibility and the support from Mason and County Finance to work with me a little bit here on doing these presentations remotely. And again, I apologize that I am not there in person with you all. So just a kind of a brief agenda here for my presentation. As Mason mentioned, going to kind of give you an overview of the audit opinion. We got a couple slides with some financial information that comes out of the ACFR itself to try to hone in on some of the key things. I know the ACFR can be quite an overwhelming document at times, given the length and all the information that's in there. But just wanted to touch on a few things that we think are important and kind of look at some trend information. We have what are known as our required communications. Those are the things that the audit standards require me to submit to you all in writing and to go over with you all. And then, of course, I'm happy to answer questions throughout. I've got a slide at the end, but certainly stop me as I go if there are any questions that you all have and would like to discuss. Just by way of reintroducing ourselves, as Mason mentioned, this is our second year performing the county's external audit. Mullen and Jenkins, the governmental practice, the governmental industry is a huge part of what we do. Myself and everybody else that works on the county's engagement, auditing government, serving state and local governments across the Southeast is all we do all year. So this is really important to us. This is not work that we just do when it's not tax season or when there's not other commercial audit work going on. This is all we do year round. I continue to serve as the county's engagement partner, which means that I have the ultimate responsibility to review and sign off and approve the issuance of our reports. Skipping to the third person on this slide, Kayla O'Sullivan. Kayla is a manager with us. She is my right-hand person throughout the audit. She's kind of our field general, if you will, as it relates to the county's audit. She works with the county. She oversees our audit team day to day and makes sure that the audit is on track and done and all that kind of stuff. And then all of our audits go through an independent quality control review process. Another partner or director in our governmental practice who is not at all associated with the county's audits will conduct a quality control review once myself and Kayla were finished and we felt like, okay, we've done everything we need to do. We are ready to issue these reports. We're now going to have an independent partner look at it to make sure that we've dotted all of our I's and crossed all of our T's. And that was done by Brian Nicholson this year. Last year it was done by a different partner named Doug Moses. And we try to rotate those QC reviews just to get that added element of independence, that second set of eyes, if you will, that is looking at everything that Kayla and I are doing to make sure that we're, like I said, dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. So on this slide here, I mean, this kind of lays out the nuts and bolts of the audit, if you will. What is our responsibility? What is the county's responsibility? And then, what did we ultimately issue? As those first, 3 or 4 bullets talk about, our responsibility is to audit the county's financial statements and to express an opinion on whether or not the basic financial statements of the county are free from material misstatement. We are required to perform our audit in accordance with GAS, which is generally accepted auditing standards, as well as government auditing standards, which is the yellow book that you all were discussing earlier during the meeting. And the financial statements are the responsibility of the county's management. So, the county is responsible for preparing them. They're responsible for all of the assertions that are in the financial statements. Our responsibility is to audit them and to express an opinion on them. That is what we have done. We have issued an unmodified or a clean opinion on the county's financial statements. There's no higher or better opinion. That is the best outcome you can have in an external financial statement audit. And how you can interpret that in layman's terms is that the county's financial statements are considered to present fairly the county's financial position as of June the 30th, 2024, and the results of its operations and its cash flows for the fiscal year then ended. Real quick, I normally don't touch on this, but this last bullet point about our responsibilities does not extend beyond financial information contained in our report. And our responsibility doesn't really extend, we're auditing the financial statements of the county as of June the 30th of 2024. And it's not uncommon for governments to have a subsequent event or two disclosed in their financial statements where they maybe had a big debt issuance after year end, but before the issuance of the financial statements, or some other similar type disclosures. But this year, with the significant event of Hurricane Helene, that subsequent event did have an impact on our audit procedures because there were a few things that we wanted to make sure did not need to be adjusted or changed. And so, what that looked like for us was some additional inquiries into capital assets to make sure there were no significant impairments or write-downs we needed to look at for things that may have been, beyond repair damage or destroyed in the storm, looking at the collectability of receivables and those types of things. And so it's kind of a unique situation in that normally we do have some subsequent events in the footnotes. This year was certainly more significant than others because of the significance of the event that occurred in Hurricane Helene. In addition to our report on the financial statements, we issue two additional reports. The first one is our government auditing standards report, or our yellow book report. This is the report that where we look at the county's internal controls over financial reporting and compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, grant agreements, and other matters where the non-compliance with those could have a material impact on the county's financial statements. When it comes to internal controls, we evaluate the design of the controls. We verify that they have been implemented by the county, but we do not express an opinion on the county's internal control structure. Our report this year, we did have one finding with regard to internal controls, and it really just relates to the size of the adjustments that were posted to correct beginning balances. So, hearing that we have a material weakness in internal control, that certainly is a significant term and has the potential to kind of raise some alarm. But what we're talking about is because we had to post and correct an error in the prior year's financial statements, by definition, it was a material adjustment to correct a number that had been previously reported and audited and issued in a county financial statement. That's sort of like one of those, like, by definition, it's a material weakness because of the size of the correction that had to be made. This is not a systemic problem. This is not some sort of issue we look at with the county's internal control and say, okay, we really have some significant things we have to fix. This is more just one of those government auditing standards kind of ties our hands on how we have to report things like this. The prior period adjustments, really, the second bullet there about leases and subscription-based information technology arrangements, or SBITAs, truthfully, had we not had to adjust and fix the opioid settlement funds, likely we would have just called these lease and SBITA adjustments immaterial and run them through the current year because they're just really not significant. But because we were already fixing beginning balances, it was kind of one of those where, like, well, the door's already open. We might as well go ahead and get it all fixed and correctly reported in the prior year. So the lease and the SBITA items are really not very significant. The opioid settlement funds and really the opioid settlement funds, and I have to give the county some credit here. First of all, this is not an uncommon issue. We actually have this finding at several counties of ours this fall, and a lot of it stems from just the lack of information and kind of some of the conflicting guidance that was put out in the last 18 months or so, going back to when these opioid settlements were originally announced. So, realistically now we've got this opioid settlement money accounted for correctly in the county's financial statements. Don't expect this to be an ongoing problem or a situation that we have to revisit again. And like I mentioned, I certainly don't want the county to feel too concerned about this, because again, this is an issue we've seen at several counties this year across our governmental practice across the Southeast, and a lot of it had to do with just some of the information that was or was not available at the time the prior year financial statements were issued. The last report, or I guess it's two reports really, because it's a federal single audit report and a state single audit report. So these are the final two reports that we issue. And just to piggyback a little bit on the conversation that was happening earlier regarding the amended audit contract, the number of programs we had to audit this year, here are the list of the programs that we were required to audit this year. Two of these programs, the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds, or more commonly known to everybody as the ARPA money or ARPA funds, as well as the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. These programs have been out there for several years now. We have audited them several times. And I think for this fiscal year, specifically for the 2024 fiscal year, we were expecting the federal government to remove the high risk designation from these two programs, like they did on the education side. There's similar COVID-19 recovery programs on the education side that school districts have been spending for the last several years, and the high risk designation was removed from those. Unfortunately, that was not the case with the federal government. They kept the high risk designation for ARPA and for ERAP. And so unfortunately, we were required to audit those programs this year because they were over the county's dollar threshold for being a type A program, which are the large programs the county has. If we remove those two programs, then we would probably be in a situation where we would not have had to have the additional single audits that we had to have this year. And we certainly hope and expect the federal government to make some changes to its high risk programs in the upcoming fiscal year as well. Additionally, the federal government changed their compliance threshold several years ago with the uniform guidance. I think this goes back to 2014 when this change was made, excuse me. And they increased the threshold from 500,000 to 750,000. That threshold is again going up for the June 30, 2026 audit on the federal side from 750,000 to $1 million. The state of North Carolina kept their threshold at 500,000, and it is our understanding that they're going to increase that threshold when the new uniform guidance thresholds go in to effect for the June 30, 2026 audits. And part of that reason is because of the number of single audits that auditees are having to undergo and auditors are having to perform. So I'm hopeful that the sheer volume of single audits that we're doing is going to be less in the future and less of a burden on county staff, because it's a lot. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of different people we have to ask for access to, and so it's a significant undertaking when we have to add a fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth single audit. So our opinions, we had unmodified or clean opinions on compliance. So no compliance issues that would cause us to issue it other than unmodified opinions. So clean opinions on compliance for both the federal and state single audits. We did have two single audit findings, and one of those relates to the way that employees have to track their time and complete these timesheets that shows the number of hours and ultimately minutes, hours that go into the reporting on these administrative reports that go to the state of North Carolina. We have this issue with a lot of counties in North Carolina. A lot of times there's not a great way to marry up the timekeeping systems that governments use for employees to track their actual, like their time for payroll purposes, in the same with the increments that are being used to report in these programs. And these differences are not significant. It's not like the county is overdrawing money from the state or underdrawing money from the state. It's just where these amounts don't match up. We can't just say, oh yeah, look, this tick and tied and matched up perfectly. And so we have to do something with that in our report. And so we consider this to be a significant deficiency. We've talked with county staff about this, and I think Mason mentioned there may be some additional discussion that they want to offer about that finding. The second one was maybe a little bit more significant. This was in the temporary assistance to needy families program. There is a requirement from the state of North Carolina that each month the county conducts what are known as second party reviews for new or reprocessed cases. And the requirement from the state is that 25% of these are being looked at in this additional review each month or over the course of the year. And this was not being done. There were a few months where we were kind of right at or near the threshold, but then there were several months. I think of the months we looked at, there were 9 months in the year when we weren't really even close to getting to that 25% threshold for the second party reviews. And so this was a little bit of a bigger deal. Again, it doesn't result in any question costs or money that the county has to send back or anything, but it is an issue. And we know from talking with county management, getting their corrective action plan, that there is a plan in place to get this done. Because this rose to the level of being a material weakness in internal controls over compliance, we will have to audit this program again next year. And so we'll look to see how the county has addressed this, and we'll verify through our single audit next year that the issue has been corrected in the subsequent year. So the next few slides here are what are known as our required communications. Again, these are the things that the standards require me to communicate to you all in writing, and I've done that by delivering this presentation, so I'm not going to go through each one of these. I'm just going to touch on the ones that I think are important, especially for an audit committee to hear directly from the external auditor. One of the things that I think can get lost in an audit sometimes has to do with accounting policies, footnote disclosures, and those things. And, we tend to focus on the numbers and what's actually in the financial statements. But, a big part of what we do is looking at the county's accounting policies, making sure these accounting policies are reasonable, that they're in line with what we see other governments doing, that there's no controversial or emerging issues where there's a lack of guidance that tells us, how to handle a transaction or how to report an item in the county's financial statements. And so we did not have any issues with the county's accounting policies. We did have to implement a new standard this year, GASB statement number 100. This is the accounting changes and error correction standard. Important to note with this standard that no new items were recognized in the financial statements. The last couple of years, we've had some significant new items with leases and subscription-based IT arrangements. These are completely new financial statement elements that have never existed before. But this new standard, Accounting 100, there's no new item being recognized in the financial statement. It just changed the presentation of how things are shown in the financial statements when you have an accounting change or an error correction. Our relationship with management, we received full cooperation from the county's management and staff. Again, as I mentioned earlier, especially when it comes to the single audit side, there's just a lot of information that we have to request from the county, a lot of information we need to request, a lot of people we need access to, people we need to talk to, and we really appreciate, especially with the significance of the events of this fall, we appreciate everything the county did to kind of keep the audit process going and to get us everything that we needed in order to complete our audit procedures. So full cooperation from management and no issues there. No consultation with other accountants or significant issues discussed with management that were not considered or reflected in our audit report. And then last but not least, I always think it's important to touch on auditor independence. As you all were discussing earlier, the difference or kind of the consideration between the yellow book and the red book, and all these different things that auditors can and cannot do. We not only have to meet the requirements of the AICPA, but we also have to meet the requirements of government audit standards of the yellow book. And so there were no fees paid to M&J and no things that we did for the county that would potentially impair our independence and therefore render our report obsolete. If we were not independent, we could not opine on the county's financial statements as their external auditor. Two quick slides on some general fund financial trends. This first slide here looks at fund balance in the county's general fund. I always think it's important to point out that that fund balance is not cash. Fund balance is not, this is what we have left over that's available for spending. Fund balance is literally kind of what's left when we look at all of our current assets in the general fund, and then look at our current liabilities, the biggest of which being, normal accounts payable, accrued liabilities, accrued payroll, those types of things. Fund balance is what's left over. And the state of North Carolina requires us to go through a calculation that is called the restricted for state stabilization calculation. This is a calculation that the state requires where we look at what's in fund balance at year end, the general fund's fund balance at year end, and how much of that fund balance is not in cash, kind of right off the bat. And what the state does is the state makes county governments, the state and city governments kind of set that aside to say we cannot spend or appropriate in our future budgets this non-cash fund balance. And so, as we see that green shaded area is about the same as it was last year. It has been trending up a little bit over the last few years, and so really, how do we interpret that? What that means is that the county's fund balance, as the percentage of the county's fund balance at year end that is in cash, has been decreasing a little bit over the last couple of years, and I think you see that reflected a little bit as well in the unassigned fund balance. That's the fund balance that's sort of left over and available for the county's spending. These are the items that this is kind of the money that's left over that we can look at for future spending, future projects, initiatives, what have you. That unassigned fund balance has been trending down a little bit, and being at 14% of total general fund expenditures is certainly in compliance with what the state laws are. So no issues or concerns there. But just from a fund balance perspective, it is a little bit on the lower side when we look at what GFOA and best practices and what have you recommend in terms of what is our unassigned fund balance at fiscal year end. This slide here just looks at the percentage of total revenues in the general fund and what percentage of those revenues is made up in ad valorem taxes. I think this slide or this trend can be important. Probably not necessarily for the audit committee, but certainly for the board of commissioners when they look at what are we looking at as far as tax rates and those types of things. And as we can see over the last 5 years, the percentage of total general fund revenues that are comprised of ad valorem taxes has remained relatively consistent over the last 5 years. And so I know with governments, especially in different parts of the Southeast, with all of the ways in which there's just been a significant change and significant rise in property values and all these types of things. Sometimes we've seen where ad valorem taxes have shot up significantly, but over the last 5 years, we can see that the ad valorem tax revenue in the county's general fund has remained a pretty consistent percentage of overall revenues in the county's general fund. Accounting recommendations and related matters. These are just things that we want to make sure the county is aware of and kind of stays on top of. Next year, we will have to implement the new standard on compensated absence reporting. This will change how the county, as well as all other state and local governments, measure the liability for compensated absences. And then in 2026, the next big standard will be this financial reporting model improvements, Statement 103 from the GASB. There will be some changes in the county's financial statements, and of course, I'm happy to talk, much more about these, but just more or less pointing them out to you all now, and just to know that we will be working with the county to ensure we get these two new standards implemented. Other big projects that the GASB has going on that are not that are not final standards now, but just are kind of things the GASB is looking at. Revenue and expense recognition, your going concern uncertainties and severe financial stress and infrastructure assets. These are all big projects the GASB is looking at right now, and are things that could come out as final standards, and will impact the county's financial statements accordingly if and when those final standards come out. But these are the items, these are the big things that are on the GASB's agenda right now. I'm going to skip over this slide and just kind of mention our free continuing education, especially for the audit committee, and certainly if any of you all are CPAs and have CPE requirements. And we do quarterly free continuing education, and so these are eligible for CPE credits and all that kind of stuff. And so if you're not getting those distribution emails from us, please get your contact information to Mason, and he can get it to me, and that way I can ensure that you're on our distribution list for these free CPE events that we offer to our governmental clients only. And with that, I am happy to take any questions from you all about the county's external audit for fiscal year ended June 30, 2024.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Yeah.
I had a few short questions. Who's going to be signing the management representation letter?
That has been,
the manager.
You want me to get that one, Tim, or you got it?
Yeah, no, I mean, the management representation letter was signed by the county manager, and as well as by the chief financial officer, the finance director, Melissa Moore. You know, we also have Mason and Glenn sign the management representation letter as well, because we consider them to be pretty intimately involved in the audit process and in the preparation of the county's financial statements. So those are the 4 people for Buncombe County that we've asked and had signed the management representation letter.
Thank you very much. Thank you for signing that. In terms of looking at the whole annual report, there's many sections in there. Are you able to identify the non-audited portions from the audit portions of that annual report?
Sure. So the introductory section, which is the part of the report that includes a lot of the kind of the informational things about the county. And so your introductory section includes your list of principal officials, your organization chart, your GFOA certificate from the prior year ACFR, as well as the letter of transmittal. Those items are all specifically not audited, as well as the statistical section, which is the last section of the report before the compliance section, the statistical section that contains a lot of that 10-year trend information. So those 2 sections are specifically not audited. Our responsibility as it relates to those 2 sections is to read those sections. You know, especially when it comes to the stat section, the GFOA can get very picky about how things are presented there. So, you know, I typically will pay at least somewhat close attention to what's going on in the stat section and making sure that, you know, the numbers that are presented that do correspond to the financial statements are right and tie and agree. So our responsibility as it relates to those sections is to read them. And if we do find any sort of a material inconsistency between what is in the introductory and statistical sections and what we would consider to be known facts, circumstances, et cetera, we would describe those material consistencies in our report, but we're not issuing any sort of an opinion on the introductory or statistical section. So those 2 sections are considered to be unaudited. The next kind of section of the financial statements would be your required supplementary information. This is information that the GASB requires to be included in the county's financial statements and is comprised of your management's discussion and analysis, which is right after our audit report in the front of the ACFR, as well as right after the footnotes to the financial statements. There's several pages there that contains required trend information regarding the county's pension and other post-employment benefits or OPEB plans. The required supplementary information, or RSI, is required to be included in the county's financial report. GASB requires it to be in there. We are required to read it. We're required to compare it to other parts of the financial report. You know, with the pension and OPEB information, we make sure that what's in there is kind of matches up with and jives with the actuarial reports that are used to derive the information. But again, that information is, we're not opining or giving an opinion or any sort of assurance on that information. Then you have your basic financial statements, which starts with your government-wide statement of net position and goes all the way through the footnotes of the financial statements. All of that is included within our audit opinion. And then after the RSI, you have all of the combining and individual fund financial statements and schedules. And when it comes to the combining and individual statements and schedules, we issue what is known as an in relation to opinion on that information. We read that information, we reconcile all of that information with the basic financial statements themselves, and our opinion is that all of that information is materially correct in relation to the financial statements themselves. So when you're really trying to boil it down to, okay, what parts of the ACFR are not audited at all, the introductory and the statistical sections are not audited. The RSI is considered within the scope of our audit, but we don't express an opinion on that information. I know that can get a little bit, kind of confusing, but does that answer the question?
It does. Thank you very much for me and anybody who's listening on this recording. One last question. We do have a new internal auditor. I'm sure you hopefully you've had a chance to meet him or receive an email from him, hoping to open up the lines of communications. Are you able to share some of your audit information directly with him? That might help him out.
Of
in
course.
his, Thank you very much.
Of course, we would be happy to do that. I really appreciated listening in on the conversation you all were having earlier, and I think that a lot of governments would be envious of the internal audit folks that you all have, and just some of the information they were sharing and discussing earlier. And so, we are happy to share and to involve internal audit as much as we can. In our not only in communicating any information about the 2024 audit that we just completed, but certainly as we look towards 2025 and getting prepared to start that here in a couple of months. Can plan to have some meetings and discuss information with internal audit as well.
Thank you. Any questions?
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, Tim. We really appreciate it. Presentation.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all. I appreciate the flexibility. I would much rather be there in person than be dealing with the the Achilles injury. But I appreciate the flexibility and the ability to get on Zoom and present this to you all this morning.
If you all are set, I'd like to take a vote quickly to register your acceptance of the audit, and then we can let Tim go after that. And then I do have a couple notes for you, but if you all are for.
So is there a motion to accept the audit?
So move.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay.
All right, thank you, Tim. We'll talk to you later this evening.
Sounds good, everybody. Hope y'all have a good day.
You too.
Thank you. That was really all we needed. I just wanted to call on a couple notes, really for commissioner benefits. So while Whiteside is still in the room, but also wanted you all to hear this too. I really enjoy the statistics that Tim brings to us every year. I think they're simple, but also very meaningful. But I know that there's a lot of deep budget conversation going on right now, and I don't want to be inconsistent or confused. In that moment where he talked about the portion of our fund balance that is non-cash, that is restricted for fund balance, it doesn't mean that we have moved to a lesser financial condition because less of our fund balance is held in cash form. I actually think that we have increased our investments. We're moving out of a very high interest rate environment, but over the last few years, we've been pushing investments, right? So fund balance, I think, has been earning us more, but it's represented as less cash in that number.
Right.
So I think I don't want to send you down another road. Also, when he talked about the unassigned fund balance percentage, he showed a 14, almost 15% number there. We have a lot of conversations with you all as the board about our available fund balance percentage. So that portion is just the unassigned classification of fund balance. When we talk available fund balance, we include unassigned, assigned, and committed. So if you were to watch a board meeting or a budget retreat, you're going to hear a slightly different number. Where this is 14.7.
17%.
Around 16 or 17 is the available. So not inaccurate, but talk about some things that are very closely related. Yeah. All right, we appreciate y'all. I think me and Glenn are going to sneak out. I'm going to leave this audit contract amendment with Rob to get Mr. Christie's signature, and then be available if you all have questions.
Okay, what am I going to do next? Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
So then the only other items I think left on the agenda were the one of the items was the reappointment of the committee secretarial duties. As of right now, that is officially loose with Kelly Houston. But I think we were trying to move, my understanding is, to a model where someone in the internal audit shop would be kind of taking over the secretarial duties. I don't think it makes sense to be the audit director. Obviously, I'll be presenting at most of these meetings. And so we can still move forward with that item on the agenda and reassign it to basically be, one of the internal audit positions, but obviously both of those positions will be vacant on January 31st. So I'm going to give an opportunity for you all to discuss that and see if it still makes sense and you all mind to reassign those, or if we should make them Kelly so we can get those positions.
But Kelly can't get rid of it. Yeah, leave it with her so we can reassign. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think makes sense.
So there's no one else in the finance department that could, or managers that could, secretarial position?
I mean, we could, yeah, it could be, I don't think there's any specific requirement about who the secretary has to be, it just has to be someone that the audit committee agrees on, and that person has to agree to obviously do the work.
I will say that, this go round, like, I kind of left Rob to do everything, because we are underwater now. I can come and I can take notes and do all the things, but like this planning for this meeting, I used to have a much more active role.
Right.
And I was like, you got this, because risk management is badly underwater. So if Rob is still good to kind of follow this model where he's kind of doing the front end and I just kind of take notes and things like that.
Yeah.
And I can help him as needed, then I'm okay with that.
Oh, okay.
But
That work for people.
Yeah, that works for me, and then obviously at some point, we, whenever we are able to fill one of the internal audits, we can assign to that person. And that person can do the scheduling and the notes and that sort of thing. I talked with our auditor, Lisa White, prior to Hurricane Helene, and she was on board with being that person. After her time.
So do we need an official vote on that?
I don't think so, because it was just kind of something I wanted to bring for discussion, we're not making a change, so I don't think we need to vote on it.
one thing I wonder, and this is something that you're probably more in tune with, if we need to go ahead and plan, usually December is when we plan the following year meetings, and the only reason I say that is for the difficulty of grabbing the rooms, but you may be in tune with if we're still doing normal meetings or just as needed meetings or whatever, so.
Yeah, I think my discussions with that have been that we need to reestablish audit committee meetings. So I think historically we've met once a quarter, the committee's still comfortable with that, and I think our next meeting would be April. Then one after that would be then July, then October, and then sort of have a meeting in December to kind of close out the year and reschedule for the next year.
So maybe when we have our April meeting, or even when you send that out, you could at least have the other meeting date.
Yes, some dates at a time, yeah, and I'll send an email to the committee and see if anybody has any dates in April, July, and October that they want blocked off. But I think typically we try for like Tuesday mornings, so we'll try and look for a Tuesday morning in April that works for everybody to kind of get that first out.
Okay. Sounds good.
So then the last two items were in relation to the approval of the audit plan and the audit charter. So we do need votes on whether or not the committee is willing to approve the audit plan and a change to the audit charter as well.
Is there a motion on the audit plan?
I'm sorry, where is the audit plan?
So the only thing that was on the audit plan was the P card audit and the risk assessment.
Oh,
What
okay.
he's doing.
Oh, okay,
Yes,
yeah,
this year.
all righty,
Yes.
that's fine.
Is that a motion?
I guess so.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And now the audit charter as presented.
So
The motion,
I'll make a motion, but in terms of discussion, I just want to emphasize that I'm not sure if we heard back from the external auditors on that. So I'm not sure if I can add that caveat, but that's just something I would like you to.
Yeah, I've reached out to them to get their opinion on it as well, and if they don't support that, that's definitely something I'll bring to the audit committee as well.
But considering, Avril's 100% support that she demonstrated, I'm not sure if that's a question. So
Yeah.
that would be good to have.
yeah, it'd be good to hear that, so.
Yeah.
Okay. All right,
Do we need a motion here? I can make a motion to pass this charter with the external auditors approval as well.
okay. Second, okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. I think that's it.
Yep, I didn't have anything else. One of the things that as a group we'll need to sort of figure out, and you sent me an email about this as well, is hold on one second. Let me look at my notes here, make sure I've got it right. Glenda's term, it's officially expired July of 2024. So she is eligible to be reappointed for a second term. If we're comfortable with that. I asked Matt Baker his opinion. That it's fantastic and is willing to stay on board. We'd love to have her for another term. Just something that we need to kind of probably put on the agenda for the April meeting. And then same thing as well. You've had your 1 year officially. Now, Bill, I think you're eligible to be chair again, is my understanding based on the bylaws, but I'm not 100% certain. That's something we need to double check with our legal counsel about. So we can discuss committee appointments at the next meeting. Okay. Make sure that we're on board. I know we're already over time, so some of the committee members.
I just was looking at the bylaws and they said chair appointment is 1 year at a time. And so that's why I was sitting, we need to do something about it.
Yeah, I think I was looking at.
We can bring that up in April.
Yeah, looking at my notes, we was kind of on the agenda to talk about it at the December meeting.
Yeah, okay.
Which was 1 year after.
Yeah. Okay, all right, bring that up in April.
Well, I really appreciate everyone's time today.
Yeah.
I think we need to vote to close the meeting as well, I believe.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Seconded.
All in favor, say aye. Any opposed?